The work session of the Annapolis City Council for Thursday, December 20th, 2018 will be called to order at 3:12. At this time, would everyone willing and able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda. Okay, it is, yeah.
The first item on the agenda is ID-316-18, a presentation on Affordable Annapolis 2030, Liberty and Justice for All.
Thank you, John and Mike. You're there in place. Awesome. Okay. So these guys did a presentation. I tried to get this in front of all of the city council, so hopefully they'll see this recording. But obviously this is an important thing for us. You know, we don't want to live in a city just full of million-dollar houses. We want to have diversity in our city, mixed income, and we're the people that are going to have to lead that. So we're looking for inspiration and ideas, and these guys put together a great thing here. So please go ahead.
So we are incredibly excited to have the opportunity for this presentation, for exactly what you said, Mr. Mayor, to heighten the fact that we're moving towards a more sustainable, long-term, and inclusive plan for our city. And so I want to introduce Dr. Michael Metzger, who's going to be introducing the plan for Achille, along with the Clapham House. So, Dr. Metzger, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Mike Metzger. My wife, Kathy, and I have lived here in Maryland for 31 years, and she is right there. She's a reading technician at Tyler Heights School and been in the public schools for 16 years. I head up the Clapham Institute, whose namesake is taken after a group of English activists who lived in and around Clapham, England between 1787 and 1833. During that time, they achieved over 69 reforms in England, chief of which was the abolition of the English slave trade. It began when a banker, Henry Thornton, built a home in Clapham, Queen Anne-style home, and single at that time, he and William Wilberforce, who was in Parliament, lived upstairs, and the downstairs of this home served as a city lab, in which they achieved banking, business, educational reform. They started over 800 schools, for example. In 2013, my institute purchased the Commodore Waddell mansion on 61 College Avenue, which happens to be a Queen Anne-style home. And our dream has always been, as Kathy and I live upstairs, that it could serve as a city lab for what we're going to talk about today. That was led, as we said, by William Wilberforce and the Clapham Institute. In 1846, when Frederick Douglass was in Scotland, he was giving a talk, and he said what inspired him more than anything to end slavery in North America was William Wilberforce. And he cited the work they did and how Wilberforce brought pressure to this urgent issue. And as you know, within a few years, Frederick Douglass was bringing pressure to President Lincoln. So 2 years ago, in one of our public events we had John Vanderheuvel speak about the work he is doing in Africa in new cities, affordable cities, of which Africa needs over 100,000 in the next 20 years. John brings a level of technical expertise that Kathy and I have never seen before, and we have been talking ever since and pursuing a partnership between his work, which you're going to hear about in a moment, and the work that we have been doing in this city and as Marylanders for over 3 decades. And so I give you John Vanderheuvel.
Thank you. Is this working? Sounds all right? All right. Thank you, Mike, and Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's a real privilege to be here, and I really very much appreciate your time. And William and Tola, thank you for facilitating this event today, and for all of you for attending. Just a few things. Achille. Now, Achille actually stands for the Africa Knowledge and Innovation Leadership Initiative, but the word Achille is a Swahili word for wisdom. And the work that I've been developing in Africa over the last 10 years has been focused on agricultural infrastructure and innovation for the purpose of helping small African farmers become part of larger infrastructure systems so they can become competitive. And so the work of Achille is just that work. It is a research, training, and development nonprofit. We established it as a collaboration with faculty from both the Harvard Kennedy School and MIT. It's a long story which I won't use time here to share, but our focus is on systems solutions to systemic poverty. And the relevance of our work in Africa to Annapolis, what we plan to do here over the next few minutes is more or less establish a few critical takeaways from our work on systemic poverty in an African context, and take a look at whether and how those matters may be beneficial, may be useful, may be effective in terms of addressing systemic poverty here in the U.S. and specifically here in Annapolis. Now, what I'm going to do briefly is reference a case study from our work in Africa. And I'm going to use the case of Somalia. I've been organizing a project in Somalia for the last 2 years related to refugees and related to sort of the general instability of Somalia. And what I want to do is focus on just a few words that are themes that are going to be important as we flesh out Affordable Annapolis 2030. And those 4 themes are entrapment, freedom, justice, and affordability. And so these 4 concepts come to play. Now, when you think about Somalia, you think Black Hawk Down, you think about extreme conditions. And unfortunately, even though Black Hawk Down, those events happened in 1993, the situation in Somalia has been unstable for about that long. The key data here, 12 million people live in Somalia. They are essentially hostages to 3,000 terrorists in Somalia. The entire Horn of Africa is destabilized due to these conditions. 2 million people displaced and scattered. Refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia have been operating since 1991. And the refugee camp populations in these neighboring countries, about 300 to 500,000 people, depending on the weather in Somalia, as well as the terrorist activity. The key questions that are relevant, I think, for our discussion today: how does this end? Or even, does it ever end? The entrapment, and this is where I want to really focus on the word entrapment. Systemic poverty, to be differentiated from seasonal poverty. Any one of us could at any moment experience some seasonal poverty. Systemic poverty is that poverty which is effectively a trap. And it's that poverty that we are dealing with here in the context of Somalia. And then replace the poverty system, the extreme conditions, replace it with what? You can't replace something with nothing. And so this is our situation that we face and we confront in Somalia. Now, protracted entrapment, what I want to describe here is the fact that this entrapment happens in spite of an overwhelming presence by the United Nations, 20 different UN sub-agencies, 20 different bilaterals, and about a half dozen to a dozen funds and banks all there. But who is accountable to wake up in the morning to actually end the crisis? This, I call it the instability industrial complex, because this is a tremendous focus of resources, about $1 billion to $1.5 billion per year of resources. But I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, how does this end? And how we are going to replace this current situation with what? And so we are actively working right now on Affordable Somalia 2030. The key applications from this case study for our discussion today about Affordable Annapolis 2030. First of all, proximity to resources does not equal access to resources. Isolation as entrapment, entrapment as isolation. Which one comes first, the entrapment or the isolation? Well, it's like saying which one comes first, the chicken or the egg. Fact is, isolation and entrapment is a reality that, and the fact that there are so many resources in Somalia is a bit of a mirror to resources that are here in the United States, here in the state of Maryland, here even in the city of Annapolis. But proximity to wealth, proximity to infrastructure does not equal access. And this is a critical takeaway. Affordability, or the lack thereof, is itself a system. People, communities, nations are only as strong as their weakest link. So poverty is a system. It's essentially the default system. It's the system that just essentially happens unless there's an alternative. Now, you can't replace something with nothing. Poverty is a system of something. Ending it requires an alternative of something. And so if we hope to end systemic poverty, not just manage poverty, not just manage the symptoms of poverty, but actually end poverty, we can't replace something with nothing. And this is why we're focused on the concept of Affordable Annapolis 2030. Managing poverty and ending poverty are not the same thing, as I've mentioned. Seasonal poverty and systemic poverty are not the same thing. So it's important to segment our challenges, segment these issues in such a way that we can begin to make some progress and organize our thinking on this. Now, Affordable Annapolis, I want to just take a second and explain the word affordable. When you talk about poverty, it is a political hot potato. And you bring up the word poverty and you go into right-wing camps, you go into left-wing camps. And unfortunately, what happens then is the conversation gets very much short-circuited politically. Affordability, on the other hand, is a unifying idea, but it's essentially the same point, which is either your lives are affordable or they're not. Now, freedom and justice for all. We pledged allegiance a few minutes ago. And people from my tribe, so to speak, love to talk about under God. But you don't stop with under God. With liberty and justice for all. You have to go all the way to the end of the pledge to really focus on this point: freedom, liberty, and justice for all. This is our pledge of allegiance. The question is, are our fellow citizens free? Or are they trapped? Is that fair? Is that just? So Affordable Annapolis 2030 is a civic initiative led by the Clapham Institute that we are supporting as Achille Affordable Cities Labs to end the entrapment and injustice of systemic poverty by unifying stakeholders across all disciplines from all walks of life to design a city that everyone can afford and enjoy. And so this is a civic initiative. Now, affordability as a system, let's begin to define this a bit. Access to sufficient sustainable income, affordable education, housing, healthcare, finance, transport, affordable criminal justice, ethical security and public safety, public services and infrastructure. Affordability is a system. Now, fantastic efforts are made routinely on any 1, 2, 3, 4 of these elements. But affordability, again, is only as strong as the weakest link. You could have a good health initiative, you could have a good housing initiative, but affordability is a system. Systemic poverty is itself a system, default of lacking. It could be 1, 2, 3, or any of these categories. And so the purpose of Affordable Annapolis 2030 is really to hone in on systematic affordability, comprehensive affordability for everyone. Now, the current status as we speak, poverty as a system here in Annapolis. I call it Unaffordable Annapolis 2018. 11% of Annapolis citizens live in poverty. It's about 4,345 people. 22% of the African American community lives in poverty. That's 2,000 individuals out of 9,500 African Americans in the city. Annapolis City has about 2 times the poverty rate as Anne Arundel County. Of then the additional 15% or so of Annapolis citizens just living 25 to 50% above the poverty line, you might call them the working poor, are at risk at any given point of lacking the means to afford basic necessities. So the situation is that as many as 1 out of 4 citizens in Annapolis are trapped. Now, or they're trapped, poverty, or seasonal. That we don't know. That needs to be researched. And all of this, I would say, needs to be much more thoroughly researched. We are just essentially laying out a framework here. The correlation between poverty and the criminal justice system. This is very, very important. And the legislation, the First Step Act that was just passed by Congress, this legislation has to be taken now into this context. And our recommendation here in our initiative is to study and understand the correlation between poverty, systemic poverty, and the criminal justice system. So Affordable Annapolis 2030, we are taking a team approach to the challenge of systemic poverty from an investment and business perspective. All citizens, those who are trapped and untrapped, the public sector, private sector, civil society. We want and intend to be advocates for a rising tide. That means the economic growth and development of the region, as well as the city of Annapolis. The key question, though, is does everyone have a boat? You can have a rising tide, but if not everyone has a boat, the rising tide then doesn't help everybody. It only helps those who have boats, boats that can float. And so part of the core essence of this initiative is to make sure everyone has a boat that can float, while we simultaneously drive economic development for Annapolis and the region. So our mission is to help build the rising tide and then help ensure all have access to a boat that floats. Now, this is a structural challenge, this is a systems challenge, and affordability for all protocol is necessary. The protocol has to be able to scale. Now, it's one thing, it needs to be able to scale up, and that is to larger systems. But it also has to be able to scale down to be personal. And you might refer, in this case, to mass customization, sort of like the FedEx model. FedEx has this incredible, efficient global network. But you're still a personal customer when you interact with FedEx. You are an individual customer. We have to be thinking systems, because as we're thinking systems, we can then think scale up and scale down. In the African context, this is the world that we have to work in. As I'm trying to help the small farmer, if all I'm doing is giving them better seed and fertilizer to increase their yields, but we haven't done anything about the infrastructure and the ecosystem, they still won't be able to compete with imported grain from Brazil. And the fact is, the small farmer in Africa isn't competing against the other small farmer in Africa. The small farmer in Africa is part of the global economy and is actually competing with the farmers from Iowa, Brazil, Australia, and other countries. And so it's very important, not just that we scale up systems. We have to have scaled up systems, but we also have to have scaled down systems that are highly personal. The architecture of affordability for all. Architecture is necessary before investments really can occur. And there are a few critical issues I want to highlight. There's a moral architecture to the issue of affordability for all, and that is, are our efforts out of pity or sympathy, or are we truly identifying with those and their conditions and how their conditions can be addressed effectively? There's a technical architecture. We run into this all the time. Is what we're trying to do good enough or the best? If it's for us, it would be the best. But somehow we think that those who are living in systemic poverty, that somehow we need to be able to, we can only succeed by pursuing the best technical solutions. But we think somehow something less than the best is going to be effective for those living in systemic poverty. To a certain extent, it's almost just the opposite. It needs to be even better than what we might be able to get away with. There's a financial architecture that's involved here. Subsistence versus commercial. And then there's a political architecture. All these issues, are we dealing with either trickle down sort of from government or trickle down from the private sector? Or are we equipping to compete? And this is a critical architectural issue. So the affordability for all protocol, either is this a central organizing principle, or is it just one of many priorities? This is a critical issue when it comes to this issue of affordability as a system. Is this just another issue? Is poverty just another issue? Or does this become a lens through which we evaluate infrastructure projects, investments, even the conversation we just had about the memorial? You know, every issue, every issue has to be viewed from the perspective of affordability for all. Now, what is the infrastructure? Infrastructure involves the issue of leverage. Fact is, if you're living in a trap, if you're in a prison of poverty, you have no leverage, okay? And because you have no leverage, because you not only have no voice, you have no leverage. That means that there are a variety of things that happen. You have no income level, so it's survival versus upward mobility. Asset or wealth leverage, informal versus formal. Market leverage, are you systemically price takers or price setters? And then opportunity leverage, limited or broad opportunity. Nothing matters if we can't implement, prove, scale, and repeat the model. So Affordable Annapolis 2030 is going to take a laboratory approach to serve as an incubator for inclusive industrial development, infrastructure, and innovation to end systemic poverty. There are a few core elements that are sequential, would be sequential, no matter whether this project involved ending systemic poverty or not. There are certain steps in the laboratory process, from scoping to spatial design for upward mobility, market research, deal pipeline, partnership recruitment, project development, implementation, and then monitoring and evaluation. What gets measured gets done. Back to the Somalia case study. There's no one saying, when does this end? As a result, it's not going to end. It hasn't ended. It's not ending now. And as far as I can tell, having worked there, having been in and out of Somalia for the last 2 years, there's no one waking up in the morning to say, this is how this ends. The reason is you don't replace something with nothing, and if you don't have a plan for affordability, systemic affordability for those who are in poverty, systemic poverty, if there is no plan, there will be no escape from the entrapment. And we will be sitting here 20 years from now, and the poverty rate will be just the same as it is now, because this was the poverty rate 20 years ago. And it's going to be the poverty rate 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if we don't take systematic action. Now, from a laboratory discipline perspective, I take the view, all of the above. All disciplines are needed. It's multidisciplinary, from policy, law, security, finance, markets, banking, engineering, infrastructure, health, education, housing, environment, manufacturing. Everything is on the table. Now, scoping. The scoping exercise, and really this is now just sort of migrating into first steps that we as a civic initiative intend to take. Demographic research, stakeholder engagement, policy analysis, and then really an Annapolis asset inventory, people, places, and things. What you might look at Affordable Annapolis 2030, you might look at it sort of like an Olympic bid. It's just way more important, okay? Community needs to come together. If we were bidding on the 2030 Olympics, Annapolis would come together. The Naval Academy, the business community, the faith community, the city would come together if we were putting on a bid for the Olympics. Room would be packed, okay? Affordable Annapolis 2030, not so sexy, but 10 times, 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more important. So there has to become a sense of urgency. And really, this becomes a matter of will. The technical expertise is there's probably enough technical expertise in this room to pull this off. But it's not always a matter of technical expertise. Just look at the instability industrial complex sitting in Somalia. I go hang out with these guys. In Somalia, no. When I go to Somalia, they're not there. I hang out with these guys in Nairobi, Kenya, because they're not even allowed to go to Somalia. $1 billion, 30 agencies, and they're not even in Somalia, okay? Now, that's an extreme case. Fortunately, Annapolis isn't Somalia. I only use the Somalia case study to bring out the lessons learned and those themes that are consistent that may be useful. Scoping is the first thing that needs to be done. Research. I'll be the first to admit, my research here is just simply desktop research. Far more research is necessary. And the most important research is the personal research, the communication, the relationships in the community with those who are living in systemic poverty. Some of these interviews and this stakeholder engagement may need to occur behind bars, because this is a very, very important element to consider. And that's why I brought up earlier the correlation between the criminal justice system and systemic poverty. Fact is, you could serve your time, and you could repay society, and you could still spend the rest of your life entrapped. And it's not just you, it's everyone who depends on you. So that, our tough law and order, my Republican friends, law and order, I'm all for law and order. But it perpetuates and has a tendency to perpetuate systemic poverty, and it affects more than that individual. Second steps involve spatial analysis, a guide to upward mobility. If we're not measuring and if we're not focused on upward mobility, there will be no upward mobility. Okay? What gets measured gets done, and we need to begin to measure this. Now, mapping, mitigating, envisioning. And here, I won't lay out these case studies, but I mentioned earlier the collaboration with colleagues from the faculty at Harvard and at MIT. And my colleagues in particular from MIT are from the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And I recruited them to work with me in Africa, because in Africa, where there's no infrastructure, you really have to establish infrastructure in order to be able to farm. And so our case study from Ghana involves the formation, taking sort of informal villages and helping them become incorporated so that capital can actually flow. Capital cannot flow if there's no formality, no legal structures. Now, how does that apply to Annapolis? Maybe certain aspects do, maybe certain aspects don't. The New Meadowlands project is a post-Hurricane Sandy, sort of a massive kind of project that my colleague Alexander DeHogue from MIT is leading. So, next steps. And thank you, by the way, for this invitation again. And our invitation to the City Council is really to collaborate, to help shape and drive this as a civic initiative. Also to bring ideas, concerns, and insights to the discussion, to engage in the scoping research stakeholder consultation, and to consider an affordability for all protocol in city planning for infrastructure, services, and economic development, and support the recruitment and promotional activities as they're planned with the community. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and also for all of you for joining us today. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I turn it back. Any questions that you may have?
My
Ellie?
first? Oh, I'm first. Thank you for the presentation. When you speak of entrapment and isolation, are you speaking of a geographically, which we do have here in Annapolis, the sense of isolation and entrapment, especially with our housing, our city housing? How do you define that in your model?
Absolutely geographic, but I would also add chemical dependency as a form of entrapment. I mean, anything that results in systemic sort of poverty, chronic, multi-generational poverty.
Okay. And a comment when you said no voice. What about voting? That is a voice for everyone. I mean, that's
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree 100%.
I mean-
And voting is critical.
yeah.
It is what I'm really referring to when I say voice is. I'll give you an example. Recently had a meeting in Phoenix with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. And the reason we met with we were talking about Affordable Phoenix 2030. And the reason we met with the Phoenix Economic Council is because their job is to bring business to Phoenix, to Greater Phoenix, okay? And we looked through their literature, had a nice meeting, it was fantastic, but then this is the question we asked. What is the strategy for Greater Phoenix Economic Council that involves the 30% of Phoenix citizens who live in systemic and trapped poverty and have for the last 30 years? Where's that in this literature? Okay, it's not in the literature.
Yeah.
So when I say voice, voting's important. When I
Yeah.
say voice, it's got to go like
Yeah.
way farther, because these need to be voices represented where the money is being spent, where the economic issues are being considered. That's where this voice is not being heard, and it needs to be heard.
So it sounds, in my mind, it's almost like creating an ecosystem. That's our responsibility, is to create this ecosystem for affordability. So how do you measure external factors that we can or can't control as far as on the federal level, like increasing the minimum wage? I mean, or how does that affect your model, basically? You know, that's a big deal. Does that escalate people up, or is that relative?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think every issue, and I
Yeah.
know that I'm painting with an incredibly broad brush, so forgive
Yeah.
me for that. But
Yeah.
if it matters, which it does, wage policy matters, small business policy, federal policy is a critical role to play.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think part of the context for Affordable Annapolis 2030 is to build this ecosystem, build this initiative, build some momentum, but build it in such a way that conversations can be had that don't immediately sort of create wedges or polarization. Now, I know that's idealistic. I know that inevitably policy and issues are debated, and as they should. What we need to really do, and I think the focus of Affordable Annapolis 2030, is to build the idea that we may have our differences of opinion on particular policies, but let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's not lose that. Let's not lose sight of that as we vigorously debate specific issues like minimum wage, like criminal justice reform, or any other issue, housing, zoning, infrastructure, any issue.
Okay, I was just trying to find a solutions. There are multiple solutions to the barrier that you speak of, and then income is one of them. But thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Shanika?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize for my tardiness. I was coming from my day job to here. I did have, thanks to technology, I was able to listen in by our live stream broadcast of your presentation. It was a lot of things that were really good food for thought. When people say a rising tide lifts all ships, I love your caveat to that. If you have a boat that floats, like, let's always end it with that. I was looking for some takeaways on what we could use, what we could implement from your presentation. Is it that the affordability initiative is the model that you've used in Somalia, was to bring stakeholders to the table and then the stakeholders figure out how to plug the holes, how to solve the problems? Or if we wanted to adopt this strategy, what would be like a first step for us?
It's a great question. Really, I very intentionally left the word draft on every slide, because really this is very early stage. We had a nice discussion with the mayor a few weeks ago. He said, look, let's start to expand the conversation. I would say that the core takeaway is a resolve that says we cannot allow for our fellow citizens to be trapped in poverty forever. Somehow, we have to come together and address that systematically. Now, it starts with a resolve. Now, we don't leave it as a resolve, otherwise that's just a speech. So this is why the first is really the scoping of really understanding why are individuals trapped? What is it about that situation? Now, a lot of research has already been done. So it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel in terms of commissioning new research. What we may need to do is take existing research and then connect some dots that maybe have not been connected. And that is, and I think one dot in particular, is we know sort of the broad impact of brushes with the law and then economic viability. We know that that's actually a hot debate that Congress has just in a bipartisan way addressed the First Steps Act. but it doesn't go nearly far enough, okay? Enterprise zones, tax policy. A lot of times enterprise zone legislation just results in gentrification. So where are the measures, where are the elements of these policies? So to a certain extent, we're really not prescribing, let's say, sort of specific steps. What we're really laying out is a civic initiative that creates a framework and a resolve and can hopefully serve to be an inclusive platform to allow the private sector, the public sector, the social sector, the civil society, as well as those who are trapped, to be able to have a voice. And the choice of 2030 is, to some extent, we can't wait to 2030 to make progress on this. But we also don't want to wait to 2040. And I guess part of coming out of an African development context, which I am very active in, that's my day job, there's always a, blueprint 2030, blueprint 2040, blueprint 2050. And there's a big announcement, it's all politics, and then the thing goes away. And people forget about it. There needs to be some type of grassroots pressure that's formed around the idea of ending systemic poverty. And I think what we're saying here, and really it's an invitation to collaborate. Mike and his group are already working with me in Africa. So this is why Mike said, look, I'm happy to help you, John, in Kenya and Malawi and Ghana and Somalia. John, happy to help you, but would you be willing to take a look at how these principles and how the formation of this pressure will also serve to lift up the entrapment that exists here in the United States? And I said to Mike, I have no excuse. I love Baltimore, but last night was the 300th murder this year in the city of Baltimore. So I can go to Mogadishu, which I do. Like every other month I'm in Mogadishu. But then I go through Baltimore. So I think, I'm probably losing a little track of your original question, but it really is we have to have resolve, and then we have to weaponize our resolve with specific initiatives. And the scoping, the research, followed by spatial planning and analysis, this is where we get into things like infrastructure. And this is where it's really almost has to become a lens or a filter. The city council, the county council, the state of Maryland, the Congress, they have issues that come before them on a continuous basis. Where is that lens that says systemic poverty? It has to be addressed in this policy. Where is that? And we have to have that. Yeah.
I think one of the things was also the vision that we had talked about earlier was establishing a vision, right? To shoot out and project what did we want Annapolis to look like in the future in relation to poverty and all these other pieces. And the second thing was defining what we mean by poverty. Because, again, some people say poverty and they think nothing. But in reality, there's like, a poverty level where people that we see that have jobs and get up in the morning and go do things. So that's the part we were talking about, how that affects Annapolis as a whole, as a city. So.
Yeah, it's really understanding the nature of what is entrapment.
Right.
And then also all of the implications, families, kids, neighborhoods. There's a lot of implications.
So what I hear you saying, if on a city level, if we started to undertake implementing a process, what you're saying is having a group that does studying and planning, and then also having a group that's kind of a sounding board or a filter. So if we had a commission that was maybe the Commission on Affordability, and everything that we undertook as a council, we sought feedback from the commission to say, how would this impact affordability in Annapolis? I hear you saying the analogy you used on an Olympic planning committee to say we all bring stakeholders, everybody to the table to plan if we were making a bid for the Olympics. So having some sort of think tank, some group where we bring everyone to the table to discuss, to plan, to strategically plan, to make Annapolis more affordable. Am I understanding that correct?
I think you just laid out 2-3 great ideas, honestly, that you guys should think about, I think that is exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It's coming up with those kinds of ideas. I would just add to these ideas that the talent, the skills, these skills don't have to be imported from, from New York. These skills are here. And we need to be very involved, very intentional of recruiting the skill sets and the leadership. And it may be those who are here still. It may be those who have left Annapolis, but believe in Annapolis and can come back and contribute their skill sets. So that's the only thing I would add is if the council's sort of organizing an affordability council or some sort of specific type of committee or council to review policies or review procurement or review issues. There are already, let's say, policies or laws in place, let's say, on minority contracting and other things. And I think those things also need to be brought into this equation. It's like we don't want to create a new bureaucracy, but at the same time, there's a certain type of question that just, it doesn't seem to be addressed in the existing bureaucracy. So sometimes, and having worked on Capitol Hill, the best ideas get destroyed by becoming a commission, because then it gives everybody an excuse to punt. And it's not weaponized in terms of current issues and decisions. So that would be my only caution with sort of a bit of I'm not saying you're rushing to make decisions. You're not. I mean, just as an opening conversation. But it would be a cautionary note that there's always a catch-22 when you institutionalize, let's say, a good intention, and that is it becomes its own sort of bureaucracy and it loses its teeth. And we don't want this to be lost because, in a way, we're the voice here for those who are trapped, and we don't want to lose that voice.
When you say we, you mean?
We as in the civic initiative that we're initiating here, Affordable Annapolis, the citizens who are here, and yourselves. We're all stakeholders.
Did you have the opportunity to speak with people who may need the assistance of Affordable Annapolis? Or I want to understand when you say we, who that represents.
Who is we? Well, we is actually growing every day. So yes, there's been a lot of consultation, but no, we haven't even scratched the surface of we. The scoping, the scoping exercise of engaging the community is really what we actually were hoping this conversation would evolve into a larger conversation, which then begins to take a little bit more of a formal feel to it in terms of organizing this into a very tangible initiative.
In the case study from Somalia, how far along is that in the process of developing a plan?
It is, in the case of Somalia, I am operating on both sides of the conflict, on the Kenya side and on the Somalia side. And so I am dealing with a different type of entrapment on the Kenya side, which is where the refugees are, and then on the Somalia side, where they have displaced essentially refugees, but they're not defined as refugees because they haven't even been able to flee the country. The refugees inside their own country. So what we are doing is we are organizing infrastructure, what I'll call special economic zones, but safe zones. And the collaboration is both with the refugees themselves and all the way up to at the presidential level and at the regional level in both countries. So I have to be a little bit careful with respect to what I say specifically about Somalia and the steps that we're taking there for security reasons. But suffice it to say, for public purposes, the work we're doing in Somalia is highly collaborative from the top all the way to the refugee and the displaced community.
Do you have, if we wanted to implement it, but we wanted to take a case study that we could look at and kind of benefit from seeing what worked, what didn't there, understanding that every place is unique, every set of needs is different. Do you have anything that's kind of grown from developmental stage to implementation where we could take a look back and say, these are things we could learn from that experience?
It's a great question, and I would say that, to a certain extent, the takeaways that I mentioned in the presentation earlier are key lessons to take away from that experience to this point. But in terms of full-scale implementation, no. It's not been implemented.
Is it if we go back to the Somalia one, from what you're able to say, understanding the security concerns there, has it been a lot of NGOs that are funding? Is it the government that's funding? Is it, how's that getting off the ground?
Well, this is the problem, okay? There are NGOs, there are governments spending money. There's just nobody ending the problem. The problem isn't going away. So it's not that the NGOs or the government are funding what we're doing. Okay, I'm funding what we're doing. What I'm saying to the UN, to the US government, to the Kenyan government, to the Somali government, to the Ethiopian government, to the African Union, what I'm saying is anybody interested in closing this refugee camp, because there is now a safe area in Somalia for 350,000 people to be able to go home. Their excuse to this point, before I started to get involved 2 years ago, their excuse in Kenya and in the international community is, well, they can't go back to Somalia, there's no place to go. So 2 years ago, I started going to Somalia. And I started working in the community in Somalia in 2 or 3 different locations in southern Somalia, which is currently essentially occupied by al-Shabaab. And my point and what I have been working on is to establish safe economic areas in strategic proximity to air and sea access to create freedom of movement. Because until there's freedom of movement in a secure environment, and this is where I also pointed out affordable, ethical security. Because the people of Somalia have been victimized by unethical security. And so that's why really what's gleaned from these experiences, and I think why Mike asked me if we could begin to work on US-related poverty, is that this dynamic of so many people talking but never having solutions and never ending a crisis, there needs to become some type of workable way forward. So what we've done in Somalia is we have organized special economic areas and agreements for areas that can be designated and then secured that create freedom of movement. And now I'm back in Kenya saying, the refugees, guess what? They actually now can go home. So now let's talk about how the refugees can now go back to Somalia. So with respect to sort of the application to Annapolis, I don't want to be ridiculous. It's very different. And yet, there are certain things to learn, such as access, proximity to resources doesn't equal access to resources. The other is you can't replace something with nothing. And so there are a few of these lessons that are learned. Now, if that can help us diagnose and understand better the systemic entrapment of poverty here in the United States, then, I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity.
Does your work have any component that seeks to redress how people got into that situation? We understand in the United States that there was Reconstruction and the ball was dropped after slavery. We understand that after that there was Jim Crow segregation, and then there was redlining, and then there was mass incarceration. There has been a series of things that have been government policy that have driven people into this tiny wedge where now they need an initiative like Affordable Annapolis. Does your organization in Africa and other places that you work address those systemic things that have driven the situation to where it is?
Absolutely. If you look at the transition of colonial power in Africa to, quote, independence, here's what happened. The politics became semi-independent. Control of the resources in Africa, that never went back to the Africans. Okay? I deal with that every day. The fact that the oil and gas, the minerals, the rights, the prime land, the rivers, the waterways, the colonial powers never gave that stuff up. It was a bit of a mirage, honestly. So with respect to systemic poverty in the United States, absolutely. You know, look at that picture. That picture's a joke. You know, I mean, seriously, without offense, I mean, and I don't mean offense, and I apologize for being that blunt, but I mean, come on. That picture is a representation of a certain type of Annapolis that maybe existed at that time. There's a lot of people not on that picture. You know, where's the picture on these walls? Where's the rest of the story? You know? So, you know, without offense to the history and the loveliness of this city, that picture right there, in my opinion, says a lot about why we need Affordable Annapolis 2030.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I'm completely supportive of eliminating poverty, and I think most of us, if not all of us on the council, we already have, I think, the resolve to address this issue. And even probably, I'd say, hazard to guess, the community as well. I mean, you know, the mayor and many of us incorporated the One Annapolis idea. He won, and many of us won by large margins. And I think that was one of the factors. So for me, what I'm really looking for are action items, solutions. You said there are no solutions. Give us some solutions. I want to know what we can do. I mean, you're talking about a lot of grand, broad ideas, but I'm looking for specifics. What can I do as a policymaker, a legislator? So, I mean, do you have any experience from any place else in the United States, or is this your first? Is the only thing you have Somalia? Because I'm looking for. Do you have any outcomes from Somalia that you could talk about, or any other jurisdiction?
Well, to put this presentation and this into some context, we wanted to just keep it tight. There's a lot we could talk about on the policy side, and maybe that is for a future work session. But in terms of policy and action and steps, there's sort of two ways to look at that. One is what's already on the books that could be improved or just be made aware of. Two is what should be on the books that isn't on the books. But then there's a third category, which is kind of, I think, where we're getting at. And the third category is, how does it all tie together in terms of like creating an affordable life? Now, the reason I bring up Africa as an example, just to get into the policy side and the action steps, the reason I bring up Africa as an example is I think there are actually things we can learn from the fact that there's so little infrastructure in Africa, like that reaches beyond sort of your Nairobi, Lagos. I mean, once you get out of town, you know, it's either Lagos or it's a mud hut. There's no such thing as sort of the small, medium-sized municipality. So infrastructure decisions, the development of waterways, transport. I mean, the number one cost of doing business for a small peasant farmer, which is 70% of the African population, is actually transportation. But you don't have a transportation, you have a transportation conversation over here. And you have an agronomy conversation over there. And then you have an electricity conversation over there. So this third category, in terms of like action, is where, okay, you've got housing over here. You've got economic development over here. You've got transport, you've got infrastructure over there. You got education. Where's that third category that says, look, and this is why we bring in spatial planning and urban planning, because by definition, the concept of urban planning, which is very rarely done in an African context, here it's done, but is it done in an inclusive context? So the whole matter of urban planning, I think, is where, by definition, if it's done well, and Councilwoman would know this from, you know, an incredible background in construction engineering and project development, would understand it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. Your project is only going to be as good as the process of the architecture and the engagement across multiple disciplines to sort of bring it together. So that's that third category. Now, how do we pinpoint this in terms of actionable policy? I don't know. I really don't. I mean, not from an Annapolis perspective.
Councilman, I might have two stories that would help here. And, to your question about we, the we would be, our friend Jasmine was going to be here today. So when we moved to College Avenue, I don't say this lightly, my wife and I moved to what we called the homeless highway. First person we met was Jasmine. Jasmine 4 years ago was living in a box. I visited her across the bridge. There was no plan to ever get her out. She came by today because she starts work at a local department store. She's 120 pounds lighter. We found out she's bright. But it was a first-hand exposure for Kathy and I and the we that every time we improved one thing, something else fell through the cracks. And we began to realize, if we have she had a $140 bill come up unexpected, I have access to that. She didn't. And it is extremely undignifying to have her try to take the 2-hour bus trip from where she now lives to come down to ask me for $140. And so we completely reworked her life, not we, but she's part of a family now. But I don't see any infrastructure to help. I don't see anything driving a city to say, what would it take to end these communities where people live? They are stuck, trapped. Now, second story. My wife's been teaching at Tyler Heights. She could tell the story better, but I'll summarize it. Several years ago, mandated to raise reading scores a certain percentage and sustain that. Hasn't happened. I think Kathy would say they finally, through a civic sort of organization in the school, determined there are probably a dozen infrastructure things have to be in place to actually raise and sustain. Healthy food, books in home, parents who read, books on bookshelves, all this. This is what we mean by a spatial analysis that says, if that infrastructure is there, you will not sustain reading scores. So Kathy put together a coalition of people, private and public, and for a period of time, they worked together until they solved that problem. That's the we. The we is we feel that we have access to all of this infrastructure that a certain portion of the population doesn't. And we dream of a city lab, a civic one, that is a problem-solving lab, but it actually gets us around, it actually gets its arms around the height and breadth and depth of the problem so that we do systemic solutions, because our experience with Jasmine is we just can't do it all.
Well, that's what I'd like to know some of the systemic solutions you're suggesting, but even, would you have examples from other jurisdictions similar to us, things that they've done that have helped to break this systemic poverty? Those are the kind of things that I'd find
It's a
useful.
great question, and I think that part of this initial scoping is to survey and say, where can we point to? I cannot, right now, I cannot point to sort of a comprehensive initiative at scale we could find a good example here or a good example there, I suppose. And my focus has been Africa, and I think there's probably, the research is probably already there. I'm not familiar with it. But there are success stories, I'm sure. The question is, are they, and this is where I get to the issue of scale. Because are we going to find the success story that can be replicated at a scale? And this is why I think it's also important to look at the numbers. I mean, we're talking about 11% of the citizens of Annapolis. That's 4,500 individuals. And if we go to, let's say, 150% of poverty, it may include as many as 8,000 individuals. It could be 1 out of 4. So in terms of like understanding at the scale, I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, look, we need to recruit 1 company, 2 companies, and they should hire all of the head of households, and that would maybe do it. Okay, but that would be, you know.
Something I wanted to ask about too is
Yeah.
it sounds like, I think you mentioned somewhere about, let's see, talking about taking a business approach to addressing systemic poverty. Is that kind of a central theme you would be bringing to this? What do you mean by that?
Well, the rising tide, I would say that if there's no rising tide, there will be no lifting of any boats. So the rising tide is economic. So the core assumption driving Affordable Annapolis 2030 is the idea of economic growth and economic development, okay? So that we believe there has to be a rising tide. But the teeth of Affordable Annapolis 2030 is to make sure that everyone has a boat, has access to a boat, and can take advantage of the rising tide. So with respect to the economic core of it, and this is where we're talking from a business perspective, and that is that it is the entrepreneurship, it is the enterprise, it is the investment that is needed to lift the whole community.
Right, but that's often not really necessarily something we do have some role in that, but I mean, you know, as governmental officials, I think we can set the policy to guide government's hand and business to a certain degree and development as well. So, and because you're also talking about access to healthy foods, you're talking about discrimination, which are things that, you know, weak areas that have been perpetuated and allowed underneath the current economic standards and model, right? So, you know, I think we've got to bring in kind of the social element to it, and also look at some of the historic role that government's played in perpetuating it and what we can do to break free from that. But so I'm also curious, I think my final question here is, what do you mean when you're talking about, you mentioned affordability for all protocol? What does that mean?
Well, an affordability for all protocol would be an analytical framework to assess decisions at its core. And that would be that if there's a procurement decision, if there's an infrastructure decision, if there's a zoning decision, if there's a policy decision affecting any of the policies that you deal with, that the county deals with, that the federal government deals with, that the courts deal with, any issue, an affordability for all protocol would be a tool. And that tool is a little bit what Alderwoman Hanson, apologies, was referring to, I think, getting at a little bit with this commission, or in other words, the affordability for all protocol would be a tool to make sure that the resources, the policies, the decisions that are made that affect the city are being made from the perspective of affordability, of how it impacts for or against the affordability for all core objective. If affordability for all by 2030 is an objective of this council, of the citizens of this community, if that is a resolve, then there isn't a decision that you will make between now and 2030 that should not be impacted by the affordability for all protocol, whatever that protocol becomes. In my own work, I am formulating, in my own work, affordability for all protocols. I'm dealing with this right now for refugees in Somalia who are sitting in Kenya as I design infrastructure for their return to Somalia. I am organizing an affordability for all protocol because I don't want to send 350,000 people from Kenya to Somalia to just go take up and live in shanties like they were in Kenya. They might as well stay in Kenya.
No, I hear you.
I
But,
know,
mean,
so that's
but
what an affordability
translating-
for all protocol,
Translating that to, it's a big difference from Somalia to Annapolis, and I think
I get that, but
Proceed
the
to-
issue of entrapment is very.
One example I wanted to offer, Alderman Savage was, and this is just really quickly, is you asked for examples,
Yeah.
tangible examples. The closest thing I can see to this is place-based investments, which are oftentimes led, quasi-governmental, whether, in California, or the commission I used to work for, they partnered. So a part of this is talking about the intentionality of partnering to provide those services to move closer towards an inclusive and affordable city. So kind of the genesis of this conversation, because I know you're talking about how it lands here today, as opposed to Africa or Somalia or even Austin, is saying that we've been talking about One Annapolis, and we've been talking about how we're approaching bringing this city together and making it more inclusive. And there's been, multiple iterations of what One Annapolis is and what it means. And a part of that, we thought, would be to approach looking at something in terms of a broader vision. Like, how can we all incorporate policy decisions? How can we incorporate things like zoning, jobs, the environment, all of those things that we always talk about? This is to kind of kickstart a vision and for buy-in. So it's not an ask in terms of like an investment or an ask in terms of, you signing on a dotted line, but it's to begin the conversation about what does Annapolis look like in the future, which emanates and comes from the One Annapolis concept. So we thought bringing this kind of high concept idea to you all to have a work session to kind of break through, like how do we integrate all of these things that we've been talking about. So I just wanted to add that. But the closest thing is the place-based investment.
We will have to wrap it up pretty soon, so I just want to say, I love that what you say is, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And what I took away from the first meeting was, you can't just fix one thing. We have to fix all 6 things, all this number of things at the same time. You showed us case study from the Meadowlands that I thought was a really good one, and you talked about the need to bring in the private sector and that kind of investment as a solution to lots of these. Alderwoman Pindell?
Oh, I just wanted to mention, as far as engagement, for the year that I've been Alderwoman, I've never seen this many people at an afternoon work session 5 days before Christmas, unless they're here for the GIS capabilities. I'm not sure, but no, it's good to see this, seriously. I just wanted to mention that.
Highlight, these are people that we asked to be here because they want to be a part of this. And if I can also just touch on one thing. I know of 4 business startups that can't afford to come to this town. So what we mean by affordable is they would hire people, but they find the costs of doing business are too much. And 2 of them we asked to be here today. I don't see them here. But this is when we dream of a city lab, it would actually be driven by affordability to all, we think could benefit all. But if we don't have an organizing lab that solves that problem, 2 of these people now are doing business in DC. So for the time being, we've lost them because we don't have an affordability protocol.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I want to mention to you, do you know a gentleman by the name of Ryan Sears? That's the person you need to talk with as far as startup labs and incubators. Ryan Sears is a gentleman who attends our business leadership meetings once a month. It's called Launch, I can't think of the name of it, but pull his name up, Ryan Sears. Three things I want to mention. Number one, I don't think we can talk about poverty unless we talk about mental health. That's number one. Number two, based upon what I've heard here today, this evening, what do I say to our 12-year-old Jasmine, who may live in public housing, about where she'll be in the year 2030? And how do we mobilize other people just like you, sir, and your wife to do exactly what you're doing? And I guess we start in this room, in the audience, that we have never seen these many people at a work session for. So those are my three questions slash comments.
Mental health, agree 100%. It's got to be fully integrated into that.
Microphone.
Oh, yeah. Agree 100% on the point on mental health. I could go on and on about
Certainly.
how much I radically agree with that concern.
What do we tell our Jasmine, who's 12 years old?
Your Jasmine, who's 12, should be 24. May Annapolis be affordable for her, and whatever she seeks to do, whatever track she seeks to go down, whatever interests her, teaching, policy, art, business, whatever she feels in her heart she'd like to do, that she would thrive and prosper in this town and would be an instrument that others could thrive, prosper, and flourish in this town when she's 24. That would be, if this thing is doing what it can do, that it would be the opportunity that she would have when she's 24 years old.
And I think her opportunity, in some ways, would hinge on what you've indicated, what you and your wife are doing, and how do we mobilize that component here in this city?
You see a few of them right here in this room.
Yep.
Second, do what I did, over Mary.
John, Mike, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that came out for this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for
Did
starting.
each of you provide your a name and email address so we can contact you? Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
you. All right. So- Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda, excuse me, is ID 317-18,
No, no,
a
cool, man.
presentation
Thanks,
on
man.
GIS
Thank you.
capabilities.
No worries. I know we're in safe hands.
I guess they weren't here for GIS capabilities. I know, I'm really surprised.
It's all new, isn't it? They were doing
so
a lot of work
surprised.
yesterday.
Well, that's what I was gonna dovetail into. Okay, so good afternoon. My name's Sean Wampler. I'm the GIS coordinator for the city. And to kind of dovetail into the initiative we just heard about, my big goal here today is to make sure you all know the kind of capabilities the city already has. A lot of times I hear about things going on and I'm like, oh, I think we could have helped with that, or I think we could have brought some information to that. So I'm gonna be kind of my own cheerleader today. So I wanted to start with, before I give big presentations, I always make my family listen to me, prepare. And my son decided to be cute this time. And I said, well, what do you think GIS is? And he sent me this slide. And I have had surveyors send me this as well that, you know, we're not to survey grade, but they were more of an information gathering and things, but just a little. And then I turned off his Wi-Fi and he didn't laugh anymore. So Josh Sturgill, who works with me, couldn't be here today. And I should also mention I've had laryngitis all week, so hopefully I'm going to get through this. We manage the spatial information for the city. One of the biggest jobs that we have is assigning and maintaining the 911 addressing for the city. This is not something that I did when I first came here. It kind of came through reorgs and things, but it takes up quite a bit of our time. We do provide some basic IT support since we're a small IT staff, and I act as the liaison between us, the state, and the county. We also kind of become part of the OEM team during activations and special events. So these are some of the data layers that we manage. We have over 150 data layers. Most are mine, but we do take some from the county and the state. The county's been amazing in letting us work with them and collect data together. That mitigates a lot of our costs. And we integrate with quite a few systems that help run the city. Our new civic rec system, the iWork system, of course the 911 system. But the problem is all of these different programs tend to require the data in different formats. So it's a lot of massaging to get things in and out of the different systems. Some projects you may have heard of. We stood up the polling location application for the last election so people knew where to go vote. We recently won an award for our Weather It Together story map that kind of tells the story of rising seas in Annapolis and how the city kind of teach residents how they can learn to adapt. And our substance use disorder bed finder. I always joke with Chief Simmons that this is kind of the Oscars for my industry, so this was a career-long dream for me. So why does GIS matter? And to me, well, I think it matters, but we use it in every single department in the city. For OEM, we monitor, events. We also provide a dashboard for the opioid epidemic that tells them where we are in the city with overdoses. And I'm the public safety GIS chair for the inauguration. Excuse me, laryngitis. For fire, they're using our pictometry that allows them to measure how much hose they will need before they get to a fire so they can prepare if they're coming by water or to a remote area. We're also working on an online hydrant lookup that will allow them to see what hydrants are close by so as they're en route, they can know what they're getting into. For planning and zoning, we've stood up a damage assessment. The inspectors can take tablets out in the field. They can collect information and it goes real time to the EOC so that we can all see what's going on. And I thought it was great. They had a picture of our zoning application in the last presentation. But we also did an interactive map for the public. From what I've been told from fellow GIS people, these things are really important for real estate so that businesses know where they can come in a jurisdiction. For public works, and I forgot to mention, we do a lot of ad hoc projects for these departments as well. These are just some of my highlighted projects. The utility viewer allows our engineers to look at drawings directly on their desktop so they don't have to go look through drawers to find the as-built. One engineer told me this saves her probably a half an hour a day. And then we're going to release an online snow emergency route, thank you, that will allow people to see if they live on a snow emergency route. Police obviously use it to help them with monitoring crime data and hopefully to help prevent and mitigate. Environmental policy, we have some great data from the Chesapeake Conservancy that allows us to look at our tree cover and canopy and maybe look for ways that we can increase that canopy. The law department uses our photos from our pictometry because they're dated, so they can take them as evidence into court, and they have a source that's recognized as a legitimate timestamp. For finance, we do a lot of tax analysis for areas. This one shows land use, tax exempt, and then total assessment as a dashboard. And I used to joke that I hadn't found a use for GIS for human resources, but I recently did. I was asked to take a look, probably a couple years ago now, at how many of our employees live inside the city versus outside. So I told them, you know, it took me a number of years, but I finally found a use. I asked Eva in the mayor's office to give me her top list of citizen questions that she gets. And what I was curious is every single one had some sort of spatial component. Now, some of these we do have GIS solutions for, like where is your alderman, or who is your alderman? Also, the part, not where is, also, that would be cool. And then the Park Finder application are both GIS solutions. It's kind of given me a nice look at maybe where I should focus next for some of our public applications. Some things, though, are best handled by third party. For example, Google Maps Transit is a great application that we feed our bus routes into. And you can go from Annapolis to California and say, I want to take a bus, and it'll tell you what to do. There's no need for me to recreate that. You know, I'm just going to use what is available. This presentation I'm going to make available. Each one of those is a hyperlink to our website. So if you have use for dealing with citizens, this may help you give them the information that they're looking for.
Just on the last one, I think instead of police information, that would be SP+. I think the police would want it.
Oh, for abandoned vehicles? Okay.
Yeah, our parking management company.
Okay. We can change that. So I hope if you take one thing away from this today is that there are some GIS resources on the public Annapolis.gov page. If you go to the lower left, there's a black box like the one there on the screen. And I think some pretty good resources for our citizens, from the ward map to zoning. There's a story map about art in public places, just some resources that you can share. So that brings me to what I can do. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. I know different wards border other wards, and I'm always a little confused. For two places that border 3 and 4, whether it's Safeway or Heritage Baptist Church, can we put in the address and it pops out what ward it's located in?
It should, but I
Okay.
will double check that.
Okay,
It was
Safeway,
Heritage.
Heritage Baptist Church on Forest Drive, and the Safeway on Forest Drive.
Okay.
Okay. And I know with Ward 3, as you go to the county, half of Rite Aid is in the city, and the other half
Yes.
is in the county, so that's,
Yes.
no.
So one of the things that we recently purchased through economic development is something called Business Analyst. And the presentation before mine, I think this could have a lot of use. This is a very, very small number of things that we can look at demographically. I have prepared one of these for each of you, for each of your wards. Now, it is census data, so it bleeds a little outside your ward, but it should give you an overall generalized picture. But I said that's your gift for coming today and not leaving before my presentation. So,
The ones, aldermen that didn't show up don't get one, right?
they don't get
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So one of the examples, it's hard to kind of give you the breadth of GIS, but one of the examples I thought I'd run through is I was recently asked by an alderperson who's not here, how many city-owned properties are less than 25% impervious surface? Now, without a concrete and structures and things, how many are less developed? Without GIS, I'm not sure how you would come up with that information. But the way that I was able to do this was to take the parcel outline, which is down, oh, it's not going to show me, down in the lower left, the ownership data from the state, and then the layers with our roads and buildings and everything, and cookie cutter that out, and determine that the city has 107 properties, 32 of which have less than 25% impervious. And I did this analysis in about 45 minutes. So for the future, I want to get more into the type of data analysis they were describing. There's a lot we can do with this, but I spend a lot of time updating data. So I want to automate those processes more. And I want to give the public more access through approval through the directors. Because I say I'm the custodian, I'm not the owner. Planning owns their data. Public Works owns their data. I just distribute and keep it for them. And I just want to find ways to continue to work smarter. And with that, if you have any questions.
One question.
Alderman
Can
Pimentel?
you tell us how many businesses we have in each one of our wards?
Businesses are hard because we have great ways of knowing when businesses come. They have to do a certain level of checklist. When they leave, there's nothing that you say, I'm leaving the city. Business is no longer there. We have used fire inspections in the past to try to get a handle, but it is a very fluid thing.
Is there any access to personal property tax returns, not how much they're paying in personal property taxes or assessments and things, but SDAT would have, anybody running a business should be paying personal property tax.
I've been serving on a state committee for just this thing, to say we feel the state should provide something out of personal property, but it seems like, and Barb may know this better than I do, they're not required to give, is it an address?
The address of where the tax bill is sent is provided, but the physical address.
Maybe somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know it's within city limits, and that is all.
So we can do,
Although they do have that.
yeah, Yeah, they do.
They do. When you complete that return,
And
you gotta
that's
put it
what
where
we've
it
been petitioning
Okay.
to try to get.
Because that would be good.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we get invited to ribbon cuttings, but also just kind of like to look around and see who's new, who's been around a while. I know that within the economic business office, Hollis and Hope always have a business who's been, and we've celebrated, business has been in business for 5 years, 10 years. It's always good to kind of have somewhat of a handle. We're not going to have an exact figure every time, but I think it's good to know.
Yeah, we could probably, especially new businesses are fairly easy. It's more of those counts per
Right.
ward or something that I'm hesitant, given that I can't always validate the information that I have.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, I just want to thank you and commend you, Sean. We've worked together numerous times over the past 10 years or more, and you've always been so incredibly helpful and
Thank you.
technically just savvy and always have a solution for us. So yeah, thank you. And I'm trying to think, I think the one thing that I guess, can you clarify how, is there a public portal for viewing the different information that's available to the public?
I have it kind of thematic at the moment, so if you want zoning, you get an application that deals with zoning. I do have an overall viewer that city employees use, but I don't have a license for it to take it public.
Okay.
What I would like to do is part of our ESRI license agreement, you can do an open data portal. So you can set up so that people could go in and look around and extract areas of interest. I just need to do a little bit on the governance to make sure all the directors are okay with what I'm publishing out and writing all that metadata for all that data.
Okay, good, because that's probably the top question I get in
Good
terms
to
of
know.
GIS is just people wanting to get access to it. And so how has the cooperation been between you and the county equivalents?
I've always said I built this on the county's shoulders. I mean, they have been incredibly helpful, and I try to provide them. I was a QA manager before I came here, so when we get these big data sets, I always offer my QA manager hat and review the data. Since I can't help them pay for it, at least I can do is help them review it. So they'll do that a lot of times in lieu of payment. For me. So they're amazing and extremely helpful at the state as well.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking maybe that's something we can work on. Does the county have, like some of the data that the last presenter was asking for, or saying they would want to get? I wonder if we could create some sort of affordability portal. People can look at some of that various information. I don't know if the county has some of that already, but it might be something.
They
useful.
offer quite a few of those viewers, and one of the things that we've talked about recently is having them consume some of my web services directly into their portal, so that Annapolis just isn't in this black hole, that it is filled even though it's not their data, but we could share that application. So I'll check into the affordability.
And if we wanted to access, is there a internal viewer that we can use as?
It is, if you're on the
Councilman?
city network,
Okay.
I can send that information out.
Okay. Yeah, maybe, I guess if we can get that on the council
Correct.
desktop, that'd be good,
Mhm.
yeah. All right, well, thank you again. Yeah.
Alderman Attorney?
Oh, just real quickly, is your information feeded to the comp plan, the comprehensive plan and planning and zoning, where all of the demographics are, as current as possible? I mean, or
That's
Is that the
usually how it works. Whoever is doing a comp plan or a project for the city will fill out a data sharing agreement and then use our data to
Okay.
do the analysis.
that's good. I have to ask, I don't even know where your office is.
I'm in the firehouse across the
Okay.
street in the IT department.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So Sean, I want to thank you. You hooked me up at the mayor's conference on design. She made a great presentation for me. I'm sure she could do that for any of you guys that when you did it was amazing. We are looking into, the possibility of working out how much sales tax is paid in the city, right? So how many small businesses or how many businesses pay sales tax, just so we could get some measurable if we wanted to explore a bid or something like that. And so I sort of reached out to the comptroller's office to see if we'd start
Okay.
there, but maybe a combination of the two could be a starting point for us. On that,
They may be more willing to share it with you than me, so.
Right.
I'd
All
like
right.
to thank everyone, your entire team. Thank you, everyone here, and Barb, I have not forgotten about you. I'm gonna get there. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you all again.
Thanks for all your hard work. Have a
Thank
great
you.
holidays. Thank you.
You too.
Okay. Mr. City Attorney, next item on the agenda.
The agenda has been completed.
Anything else for good order?
Now that I'm here, Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
He was ringing the bell, so he's excused. Yes. I don't know, the presentation would have been a little bit. So was that Ross that asked about the 20% what the heck? What the heck was he gonna do with